Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the
Evening.
world. I am going to mute everyone except myself to make sure that there is no disturbance. I'm just letting just a few minutes for everyone to connect, and I see that we have a good crowd, so let's get started slowly. Again, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar on integrated spatial planning. My name is Marion Marigot. I will be your facilitator today. I am a senior advisor at UNDP. I have been working now for 9 years in spatial planning and also NBSAP and national report. So this is a great and exciting webinar for me to be facilitating. Thank you for joining us today, for taking the time. I know everyone is very busy. We really appreciate you being with us today. First thing first, on the logistical side, so we have interpretation available. At the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a little globe icon where you can choose your interpretation. I would recommend that you go on the channel that you feel most comfortable with, and I am myself going to go to the interpretation in English right now. I hope everyone can activate the interpretation if they need. If you do have any technical issues, which might happen, please send a private Zoom message to Martina. She will be able to help you to resolve any issue that you have. Please do not use the group chat so it's not disturbing and disrupting other participants. Your microphone are muted during all of the session, and this is to help ensure that there is no noise and background nuisance. But if you do have a question, of course, you can type your question in the Zoom chat or raise your hand, and we'll address your question during the Q&A or whenever we have the occasion. So please don't be shy. This is a very collaborative session, and I'm hoping that not only our presenter are going to speak, but that you can engage with them. That's the whole point of it. We have most of our presentation in English. However, we've been able to translate the presentation, and we will refine the translation to make sure that we accommodate the latest changes. And you'll be able to access those presentations in languages now and after the webinar. And I think my colleague will drop the link so you can have access to them in French and in Spanish. So we currently have almost 100 participants. So this is a big group. We're not going to introduce each other one by one. But if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you are, which institution you're working with, please feel free to do so. It will be great to know who we're talking to today. We will move forward because, as you see, we will have a lot of things to cover today. We have important objectives. The first one being understanding the importance of integrated spatial planning and geospatial data to achieve the KMGBF. And the other main point is to really understand what the parties need, whether it is currently or in the future, around spatial planning. The second part you will see really focuses on identifying existing and readily available support. And then overall through the discussion is to learn from the country experiences. So once again, please do not be shy and feel free to share your perspective and experience in the chat anytime. We have a big agenda today with a lot of colleagues that were joining us. We will start with an introduction from the CBD Secretariat around integrated spatial planning and target number 1 of the KMGBF. And then we will move on to a presentation from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources and for Development, which is one of the technical support centers that you might be aware of. We will do a quick group discussion to understand what your needs are regarding integrated spatial planning, and then we'll pivot into the second part of this session, which is focusing very much on support that is available for you at this moment. And we'll have a presentation from the KBA Secretariat and a case study coming from Mozambique from WCS. And then we'll have two last presentation on UN Biodiversity Lab and Essential Life Support Areas from UNDP, and a case study from South Africa with colleagues from SENDI. All right, this is a big agenda, so you can see on our screen all of our speakers. And again, I want to take a moment to thank you speakers for being with us today. I know you're very busy. This end of the year is extremely busy, so we appreciate that. And without further delay, I will pass the floor on to my colleague from the CBD Secretariat to provide some context around the importance of integrated spatial planning to achieve the KMGBF. Jamal, over to you.
Thank you, Marianne. And I think I need to share my screen, which means that you have to stop sharing. Great. Greetings, everyone, from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I'm Jamala Naklicheva. I'm working in the Secretariat as an Ecosystem Restoration Officer, Forest Biodiversity Officer, and I'm also covering the spatial planning, which is the target one of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So today my role will be to frame this important discussion of this webinar, and you should see my screen now. Yes. Right. So, and before I move into the three main elements of the presentation, which are the elements, the main elements of the target one, gaps and opportunities, and where we're now with the target one and the way forward. So I just want to briefly mention that the spatial planning and the change in the land use and the sea use change has been identified as one of the transformational changes that are required to bend the curve of biodiversity loss. So this was assessed, as you know, after the implementation of the Aichi biodiversity targets, and before we started, the parties, the countries, all international communities started to develop the new biodiversity strategy. This transformational change, and that was the first area that was identified as the missing, as the gap, now find its place in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework as the one. And of course, it's important for us to see the text of the target. And I just broke it down to the main key elements of the target, so it will be easier for us to read and to understand the rationale for each of the elements. So what is this target about? The target one is about to ensure that all areas are under participatory, integrated, and biodiversity-inclusive spatial planning and/or effective management processes addressing land and sea use change to bring the loss of area of high biodiversity importance, including ecosystems of high ecological integrity, close to zero by 2030, while respecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. So seeing all the elements of the targets, I'm sure that you immediately understand the rationale. So what, how, and what for. So basically, it's a very ambitious target, as we are also very short on time, the 5 years left until the 2030. And we really would like to, we need to move, it's an urgent call to move towards the development where we stop losing the natural ecosystems, and of course, ideally, we halt their loss by 2030. So, and hopefully our webinar today and also the way forward with the spatial planning and the CBD will help the parties and all the partners to advance in our knowledge and action towards that. So, and just starting with the definition on what is the spatial planning, the way it was identified or discussed, suggested during the negotiations of the post-2020, but also coming now from the eBest scoping paper, biodiversity-inclusive spatial planning is understood as the integration of biodiversity consideration into spatial planning, defined as the method or process for analyzing and allocating the spatial and temporal distribution of activities in a given environment in order to achieve various objectives, including ecological, social, and economic. So with that, definition, which was agreed upon during the negotiation, is now taken as the working definition for the EBA scoping paper. We will see how the discussion will be shaping further. But what is important, and I would like to draw your attention to some of the elements of the target one, where we're talking about all areas. So basically, while the countries can really choose on what territory, on what administrative or the natural unit they can apply the spatial planning, still the target one talks about all territory of the country, so that we can really make the analysis and the trade-off on the big landscape across all ecosystem and all users. We're talking about integrated and biodiversity-inclusive spatial planning, which means that the national policies are required for the long-term developmental objectives to be converged with a biodiversity outcome. So area of high biodiversity importance, this is another key element of the target one. It could be identified by each country. It has the different country has a variety of application and interpretation of this term, of this element. It could be key biodiversity areas. It could be ecological or biological significant marine areas, as we're really talking about across all ecosystems. Respecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. This is a very a critical part of the target one, which means that we have to recognize the local spatial planning and the management processes led by indigenous peoples and local communities. So, and moving further, I think also another important element for everyone to see is how the target one would be monitored and reported. And here, as you know, the GBF comes up with a framework of the indicators. And the headline indicators for the target one, as you see, there are two indicators that are adopted from a longer term goal, which is the red list of ecosystem and extent of natural ecosystem. So hopefully that within 5 and the next 10 years, 15 years until 2050, we would be able to see the trend in that long-term indicators. But the short-term indicators that the parties will be measuring and for the next 5 years is a percentage of land and sea area covered by biodiversity inclusive spatial planning and number of countries using biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. So I have to say that for the indicator 1.1 percentage of land and sea covered by spatial planning, we don't have the methodology and neither we have the data for this indicator. So, and really seeing this indicator, you would still see that we still need to address the issue of the gap of net loss on net gains in the area of high biodiversity important. And that is that's definitely is closely interlinked with the target 2 of the GBF, which is the 30% of restoring of degraded ecosystem, and target 3 on 30% of conserved and protected areas and OACMs. So the spatial planning is really is the target that provides the foundation for many other area-based targets of the GBF. So the gaps and opportunities. So as I already mentioned, there is a still lack of clear guidance on how to implement the target 1. We're still lacking the definition of what is an agreed definition by the parties, or what is biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, or what are the areas of high biodiversity importance, because the variety of this of the principles, how the countries define those areas is also very broad. We also found out that in this CBD guidance, there is a significant gap regarding biodiversity inclusive spatial planning on terrestrial and inland water ecosystems. But there more guidance have been developed on marine spatial planning in the CBD, including the CBD decisions. And definitely, as already mentioned, there is a big variety in terms of approaches on how the countries are defining their spatial planning. We can definitely learn from this long history of marine and spatial planning, the opportunities also to collaborate with ongoing intergovernmental work on integrated land use planning and other MEAs, but also a variety of tools and approaches that are already readily available. We will hear today about the tools developed and tested by UNDP. We have a variety of spatial data on UN biodiversity labs and many other platforms. Also, an important way forward for us is the EBS methodological assessment on biodiversity inclusive spatial planning that has been requested by CBD COP. This assessment will be ready in 2027 and will be considered by COP in 2028. So, and I'm moving now to my last part of the presentation on the way forward. So as we already know that we really need to speed up on the guidance on how to advance the work on spatial planning under the convention, we can really tap into the knowledge and this the body of experiences that the countries already sharing in their NBSOPs and the national targets. So we found out that 114 parties, like more than a half parties, they already aligned their national target with the spatial planning. So the next reporting, which is the 7th national reporting, is due soon in February 2026. And we hope that we will be able to learn more from this process from the national reports of the countries. And that analysis, the findings, which will be done target by target, will be reflected in the global report, which will be considered at the subsidiary body on implementation in August 2026. And of course, the most immediate milestone for spatial planning discussion in the CBD is the Subsidy 27, which will be discussing the area of potential further work. This is just in a few weeks in October in Panama. And the documents on my, I think that's the 2 last slides I would like to show you today, which for those of you who will be participating in Panama for Subsidy 27, I recommend you to look in this document, and Marion will drop now the link to this document, which is already posted online. The document which discusses the areas of potential further work, and that 5 of the areas includes the area of the spatial planning. Just very briefly summarizing the gaps, this is not a complete list of the gaps. Please read the document for more complete assessment. The submissions that we have analyzed were about they were reflecting on the gaps in guidance in terms of the cross-sectoral integration, agroecological approaches in the farmed landscapes, integrating biodiversity into engineering standards, municipal planning, connected networks of ecosystem for key urban biodiversity, ecological corridors, strengthen co-governance model with indigenous peoples and local communities. That was another area where the guidance gap was identified. Integrating climate resilience into the spatial planning. This is what the parties also were, parties and observers were sharing with us, and also evaluation of ecosystem functions and services in relation to spatial planning and consideration of trade-offs. So, and finally, I would like to mention that there is another very relevant document which will be presented to the subsidiary body on the Article AJ related to Indigenous people, local communities, and the link for this document will be also in the chat. That will be the first meeting on the SBAJ. And it will discuss the guidelines for the inclusion and consideration of traditional lands and resources used in spatial planning processes in environmental impact assessment to inform the biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. So really just summarizing and a very immediate step forward is what is suggested in the document that we all, while we're anticipating the findings of the EBS methodological assessment, which will be ready in the 2027, meanwhile, the Secretariat might be requested to collect the the experiences of the parties and observers that we will receive through the national reports, organize the expert workshop, and then using the findings from the workshop and from the EBS to provide further way forward for the convention, for the parties and the secretariat before COP18. So basically 2026 and 2027 will be the busy year for the spatial planning. So, and with this, I thank you.
Thanks, Jamal,
for that. I need to stop sharing.
For that presentation, indeed. And I did drop two of the links that Jamal was mentioning in the chat. So have a look at this and we'll share this presentation. If you do have questions, you can also drop them in the chat now and we can take them after. Just for those joining us, there is interpretation available at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You can click on the globe icon and then choose your preferred language to hear the content of this webinar. Thank you for joining us. We'll move on now to a presentation from the regional perspective with a focus on what the parties need. And I'll turn over to my colleague from RCMRD for that presentation with a kind reminder to please stick to maximum 10 minutes so we have time to interact with colleagues. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Marion. So my name is Michael Ngugi Kimani. I'm from the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, and I'll definitely be sharing some perspectives on what we are doing on spatial planning as a technical and scientific operation support center of the CBD. Next slide, please. Perhaps for the ones who do not know about RCMRD, we are an intergovernmental organization based in Nairobi, Kenya. We are made up of 20 member states, stretching from Sudan all the way to South Africa. Those are the 20 member states that make up our institution. And the photo on your right is the beautiful complex that we have in our premise. Next slide, please. We are a fairly old institution. We were set up by two founding institutions from the African Union, as well as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Those are the two founding institutions that gave birth to RCMRD way back in 1975. And our main role is to really provide geoinformation services to our member states. This is basically mapping of our natural resources, and we deal with maps almost on a daily basis. And the work that we are doing is very, very fundamental to the work that we shall be doing in the Technical Support Center. Next slide. So regarding the Technical Support Center mandate, just a couple of updates. Our center, we are one of the 5 technical support centers based in Africa. So we cover 12 countries. The countries are listed on your screen there. They are mostly in the eastern part of Africa. One of the updates is that we already have a host agreement signed with the CBD Secretariat. This happened about 2 months ago in Nairobi. We have conducted a needs assessment, and we have actually drawn some linkages to some existing programs, and we are actually doing a bit of collaborations with some partners. And there are some resources that we are trying to mobilize, and I'll be speaking to that momentarily. Next slide. Excuse me. Yeah, so some of the activities that we are doing, and we have aligned them with some of the targets, the CBD targets, and I will speak about maybe 4 of those targets. One is an assessment that we are doing on capacity building needs towards the implementation of the GBF framework. So this assignment, we are doing it with Ethiopia, Kenya, and Madagascar. It's being supported by the KBF, and it's trying to address how the countries can, what are the capacity needs that they have when it comes to supporting these GBF targets. We also have an activity we are doing with the FAO that deals with Target 2 on restoration of 30% of the degraded ecosystem. Our role there is to provide technical capacity on ecosystem restoration and monitoring processes. And this is an activity that is going to be on for this part of the year as well as next year. Then there's an activity that we are doing with the EU, with also C4ICRAF. It deals with updating of the protected and conserved areas. This one family sits in target 3 that looks at how 30% of our land can be conserved, as well as 30% of our seas can be conserved. Perhaps I should also try to draw a small linkage with target 1, which was well covered by the first presenter. It's on spatial planning and issues to do with coming up with spatial plans on areas of biodiversity interest. So this is something that is very close to us because we are a mapping institution, and we'll be sharing with you momentarily some of the things that we are doing along this line. Next slide. So one of the things that we try to do at RCMRD, we are very much on the ground in terms of engaging with stakeholders, with our countries, with the people who are doing amazing work in the field. These are people who are compiling data on various indicators. And I would like to use one example here, specifically target 3, that looks at conserving 30% of lands and seas. We have produced one product that is called a map book. So this map book is a collection of maps and indicators that show how the countries are progressing towards the GBF target 3. Initially, GIS and maps were just tools that were showing maps, but we look at this particular map book as a bridge between data and decisions that need to be made. So if a country needs to make some important decision in terms of how they should be doing their conservation, especially on target 3, then this particular map book serves as a good gateway towards that. From that particular map book, we have shared it with, as you can see, with the CBD Executive Secretary. We have some very interactive dashboards that countries can be able to distill the information at the country level as well as the local level. Next slide. Another activity that we are doing on spatial, that is spatial related, we try to support the local community in doing what we call assessments of their protected areas. It is not enough to say that these are the areas that have been set aside for conservation, but it's important to know that those areas, they need to be assessed so that somebody can determine if they are being managed in an effective manner. So there's a tool that we normally use for doing this assessment. It's called IMET. IMET in food is Integrated Management Effectiveness Tool. So it's a tool that we have trained over 92 participants from the Eastern and Southern Africa region. And 2 months ago, again, we did an actual assessment with the stakeholders. We had conservancies, the local administration, as well as the community that is bordering these particular resources, so that when we are coming up with the recommendation of what should be done in that conservancy, then it's an inclusive process. Next slide, please. One of the things that we noticed in spatial planning is that there's a lot of provision of data. So to ensure that the data that we prepare together with the countries is visible to people and people can access it, we have come up with a geoportal. So the geoportal is a place where you can be able to log in, or rather you can be able to access and have information on protected and conserved areas. You can access the map book there, you can access the dynamic maps, and the geoportal, it is backed up by 18 data contributor agreements that we have signed with the countries. So these are verified data sets that we have gotten from the countries. We provide every 3 months, we provide what we call a data status update for the 24 countries we cover in our region. For the Southern Africa Development Community, these are the countries which are in the southern part of Africa. We have actually done what we call a transboundary portal, where they can be able to see how their transboundary resources are increasing or decreasing based on the size that is being reported. Next slide. So on training, we have quite a bit of training that we have been doing in this field. So we recently did one training on application of GIS in conservation mapping. We had over 4,700 people taking this training. And what was interesting is that we had quite a number of products being produced by the participants, from data monitoring tools like dashboards, story maps, web maps, data layers. There were quite a lot. And what we have actually seen is that if you give participants the right tools, they'll be able to come up with very, very nice products. And these are space that will continue growing into. Next slide. We have a planned training that is coming up specifically on Target 1. I mentioned that this is one of the things that is very close to us on planning and managing areas using spatial plans. So we have a training that we shall be starting mid-November. It's a training on some of the spatial tools that are out there that can be used by people when it comes to planning and managing their areas to reduce biodiversity loss. So this one will be specifically be looking at Target 1, and we have partnered with different institutions and different partners to see what are some of these tools that are out there. And this was a need that was identified by the countries. One of the things they said that we would want to continue with these things called spatial planning and so on. But what are the tools that we can be able to use to do that? So this particular training should be able to give a hint on how they can proceed in this direction. Next slide. So this is my last slide. Part of what we also try to do is not just to compile data, but to try to come up with innovative products that can target various stakeholders. So we have an interesting product called is looking at Target 3. And the question that we are trying to address here is how do we help the countries to easily determine the potential areas they are to conserve so that they can attain their 30% mark. So we have different use cases that we are coming up with this particular tool, from identifying the protected area points, looking at the key biodiversity areas, looking at the species occurrence. When we package all this, it's possible to be able to identify what are some of the areas that can be potential for conservation so that the countries can reach the 30% mark. So the work that we are doing with UNEP WCMC in collecting data for protected areas, data verification, formatting, that is what is going to be ingested into this particular tool, and we shall be having regional dashboards for each of the countries that we shall be covering. So allow me to stop there and wish you the best in the rest of the webinar.
Thank you so much for your presentation. This is great, and this regional perspective is really important, and the TSCs are doing a fantastic job bringing countries together and aggregating the needs and also the solutions, right, and the innovation. So if you do have any question for Michael, do not hesitate. Maybe Michael, you can drop this email address in the chat, and people can contact you, and same for Jamal. We're gonna move on to a brief but important exercise, and we would like to hear from you. So the idea is that it's good that we speak. It's even better if we hear from you. So I'm gonna ask my colleagues to open the whiteboard, and the whiteboard is a feature that exists on Zoom where you can interact and write things down. It gets a little messy at first, but I will guide you on how to do that. So depending on the connection, you should see a whiteboard sooner or later coming on your page, and you should see the question that Alexi typed. What are your needs regarding integrated spatial planning? This is on purpose a pretty wide question because we have a range of actors today that can help you in different ways. So whether you need some regional peer-to-peer on spatial planning, whether you need some technical tool to map some area in the country. The second part of this webinar is going to be focused very much on a few colleagues that have some solution. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a beginning. So what you see here is the whiteboard on the screen. On the left side of the board, you have the possibility to use the sticky notes. It's a little, exactly, I see someone is putting a sticky note right now. So feel free to use a sticky note and write your answer. General can be very general response. If you cannot have access for whatever reason to the whiteboard, feel free to also raise your hand or write your response in the chat. The idea is not to have a perfect exercise, it's just to hear your voice. So again, using the whiteboard, you can use the sticky notes. You can use one of the sticky notes right now. On the board, I see a first person is writing intergovernmental. Agreed. Thank you so much. So I'll let this one finish, and I encourage other, maybe Alexi, we can drop a few more sticky notes for people to be able to write and not overlap in those two. Thank you. So I'll leave maybe just a few minutes for colleagues to come in. Again, if you cannot have access to the whiteboard, it's okay. Just write your contribution in the chat or just raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. So I can see a few responses here: mainstreaming and capacity building. So this can go through, for instance, I guess some webinars like today and some exercises, maybe some training that are a bit more technical. I see intergovernmentally agreed definition and methodology for monitoring, reporting, and implementation. That's very good to know. Easy to use tools that are available for free. I think this person might be pleased with the coming presentation that might address this. Capacity and building tools. So I see a lot of capacity building that is much needed. Interoperability between platforms. Yes, that's a great one. That's one that I think anyone who's worked on maybe global and national platforms has encountered. So thank you for writing it down here. Capacity building and collaboration among institutions, compiling and access to existing data. Yes, the ability to have access to a range of data, ideally for free, is something that we have seen repeatedly from countries. So thank you for flagging it there. GIS tool and spatial data, monitoring for the generation of spatially disaggregated data at a local level. I think that's also another one that is really important. Often we have some, issues with the resolution, even if there is a very compelling, national map. It can bring more challenges, right? At the more local level, and the need to mobilize also some stakeholders that can do some site verification in some cases. Raising the willingness for biodiversity. Excellent. I think open source GIS tool that are free or cheap. And then I see data standards and metadata protocol to ensure comparability, compatibility across scales and institution. Very well noted. Okay, keep them coming, including in the chat. We do not be shy to ask questions to the presenters today, or explain what the needs are on your side and at the national level, or the regional or the subnational level as well. The idea is that today it's an exchange with our presenter, and they're here not only to present how they can help you, but also hear from you on how they can adapt their support. I see just a few more coming in. Ensuring that the community needs are incorporated into the planning. Give ideas of incentive for the private sector to join biodiversity conservation, I'm guessing. Yeah. Discussion platform for stakeholders. Great. So from what I'm seeing here, there's a few aspects. There is the need to have platforms and access to data. That is one that is very technical, but making sure that this exists is one that is important. A second one is the training on this platform. So having some capacity building and having some exchange maybe in between parties that can learn from each other is a second one. I see also a lot of let's say, stakeholder engagement and stakeholder mobilization, whether it's to mobilize some ministries or some division in the ministry, or whether it's to have some maybe local communities, indigenous peoples, or other key actors in the country talking together. So these are really the three main that I am seeing in terms of what is needed. And I'm seeing this also for our colleague CBD, the TSCCs, KBA, UNDP, for you to have a little bit of an insight of what is needed. Finance and implementation pathway for clear responsibility and delivery. A lot of data, creating data, guidance on how to report on the non-spatial aspect of the target is an important one. And I think CBD has just published a guidance for national report where you might find some guidance there. And I suspect that my team might have this link handy because we talked about it a bit earlier today. So if someone can drop this, that would be great. All right, feel free to continue sending your comments over the chat. This is really important, and thank you for taking the time to share these with us. I'm gonna unfortunately close this whiteboard and maybe move on to the next presentation, because actually the next session of the webinar is bringing together some actors that can provide some solution, at least for now, with some data and tools that are available for you. And I will first turn over to the KBA Secretariat and Andrew Plumtree, who's going to introduce us, so maybe remind us what the KBAs are and how you can access them. So Andrew, we're displaying your presentation, and over to you.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about key biodiversity areas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a short presentation about what key biodiversity areas are and how they're relevant to the KMGBF, which I'll use as the phrase for Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework for the rest of the talk. But I also highlight the need that all countries need to be updating their KBA networks. And then I'll hand over to Hermenegildo Matimele, who's speaking about a case study where Mozambique has done a comprehensive assessment of their key biodiversity areas and how they're now using that. Next slide, please. So when you look at the mission, the goal A and target 1 and target 3, target 1 and target 3 both refer to specially areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And one of the things we're trying to do in Goal A is halt human-induced extinction of known threatened species, maintain integrity, connectivity, and resilience of all ecosystems, and halt and reverse biodiversity loss. The areas are put in bold in those statements. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do you identify areas of importance for biodiversity? There are lots of different measures that have been developed over time, often very specific to taxonomic groups. So you had things like the important bird and biodiversity areas, important butterfly areas, important plant areas. And way back in 2004, IUCN called the conservation community together and said, we need to identify something that's applicable to all species, and also not just species, but ecosystems as well. So there was a process of about 12 years of developing criteria, testing those criteria, and eventually this global standard for the identification of key biodiversity areas was published in 2016. And it has 11 quantitative criteria. And being quantitative means that they are objective and repeatable and transparent, which means that a KBA in one country is equivalent to a KBA in another country. Next slide, please. So the overarching criteria, so within these 5 overarching criteria, there are the 11 criteria, and they target threatened biodiversity, which is threatened species and threatened ecosystems, using the red list of both, geographically restricted species and ecosystems, sites of outstanding ecological integrity, sites that are important for biological processes, such as migratory stopover sites where species need to feed, or important breeding congregations, breeding islands for birds, for instance. And then sites are irreplaceable. If you don't conserve those sites and they're lost, then you lose the species or ecosystem that's found there. Next slide, please. The reason we use quantitative criteria is we want to estimate what proportion of the global population occurs at a site. And what you will find from the KBA is that you have either a globally significant proportion of a population of one or more species at a site, you'll have the globally significant extent of an ecosystem at a site, you have a site that has outstanding ecological integrity or is globally irreplaceable for conservation. So basically, all of these sites are sites that countries have a global responsibility to conserve, because if you don't conserve these sites, then you're going to lose the species or the ecosystems which are within them. And the thing I want to highlight is there's always going to be nationally important sites in every country as well. And part of your spatial planning needs to include both your globally significant sites and your nationally significant sites, which will have cultural importance and other reasons. But what you need to think about when you're doing the spatial planning is that you include both. Next slide, please. One of the key things to recognize, though, is that not all key biodiversity areas have been identified to date. So in the World Database of Key Biodiversity Areas, we have about 16,000 sites, and I'll come to that in a minute, but most have been assessed for birds because it includes the important bird and biodiversity areas. but also includes Alliance for Zero Extinction Sites and Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund KBAs as well. So some mammals and reptiles have been assessed, but many other groups have been quite poorly assessed. Next slide, please. So the World Database of Key Biodiversity Areas is at keybiodiversityareas.org. That gives you the data. You can search for your own country using that filter funnel shape on the left. And it'll give you the number of KBAs in your country. It'll give you the average percentage protection coverage of your KBAs. And then the number of trigger species that trigger those KBAs as well. What you see on the right there is that currently the largest proportion of species triggering KBAs are actually plants now. They've overtaken birds in the recent couple of years. But birds dominate on the right because most sites still have been assessed for birds. Next slide, please. What we're doing is working with countries around the world to form their own KBA national coordination groups. And these are usually composed of government institutions, conservation sector, so people in NGOs and local and international NGOs, scientific experts, often from universities or museums and herbaria, but it can include members of the private sector if they're involved in conservation, indigenous peoples groups that are representing indigenous peoples in the countries and other groups such as that. And by forming these groups, it encourages data sharing by all of the experts because they see their data being used to identify areas of importance. And that incidentally achieves Target 21 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is about using biodiversity data to plan for conservation of biodiversity. And then it also helps come to a common goal and set up objectives for guiding 30 by 30 in a country, and helps move KBAs into national policy and legislation. Next slide, please. So if you look at a map of the world, these green countries are all the countries that have formed KBA national coordination groups. The pinky orange ones are the ones that are in the process of forming those groups, and the yellow ones have institutions within them which have expressed an interest in forming KBA national coordination groups. Next slide, please. So 11 countries have undertaken comprehensive assessments of their key biodiversity areas, countries in South America, the Middle East, and Africa. And if you look at the coverage of the areas that were KBAs initially, then covered the protected, what are those are protected, what are unprotected. What it shows is that if you press the next slide, please. What it shows on average across those 11 countries is we're missing about half our KBAs in countries that have not made comprehensive assessments. So effectively, they on average doubled the number of KBAs known from their country by doing a comprehensive assessment. So that's by including more taxonomic groups and also applying all of the KBA criteria. The KBAs are being used by governments in 30 by 30 planning. They're also used to identify where you might establish OECMs. They're being used by donors, and GF in particular will only fund new protected areas if they also meet global KBA status. Conservation NGOs and are using them, and the KBAs are being used in MEA indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals 14 and 15. CBD has indicators for KBAs, and KBAs are also being used in the private sector in several different ways. Next slide, please. So particularly in the private sector, the International Finance Corporation Performance Standards 6, which is signed up to by many different institutions, they identified KBAs as critical habitat, and similarly that's applied in the Equator Principles, which signed up to by 136 banks around the world. Asia Development Bank also identifies KBAs. And KBAs are also being recognized in all the disclosure frameworks, which are being promoted to help achieve Target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework and in the EU taxonomy. And all the data from KBAs, red list data for species and protected area data are provided in a packaged way to business through the Integrated Biodiversity Assessment Tool, or IBAT. Next slide, please. So KBA is relevant not only to spatial planning, but also to many of the other targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework. One of the things I'd like to just highlight here is that developing the spatial plan is very useful, but that spatial plan, it should be critical for mainstreaming under Target 14. I've recently been doing an assessment of MBSAPs that have been submitted to date, and none of them make that linkage between using the spatial plan to help mainstream biodiversity across different sectors. Next slide, please. Recently published a paper, and I'll stick the link in the chat after this, which compared systematic conservation planning, and we'll hear a bit about that from the UN Biodiversity Lab and their ELSA system, with KBA approaches and the differences and the benefits of each approach. And this paper basically shows, if you look at the box on the far right, some of the things KBAs give you, it helps you identify what sites have global significance. Often SCP doesn't do that unless you include KBAs into the systematic conservation plan. It confirms that species are definitely there, can do it for multiple features and things of interest, such as aggregations, integrity, irreplaceability. And by using quantitative criteria, it allows you comparisons between countries, which systematic conservation planning doesn't necessarily do. Next slide, please. So we're encouraging that all countries, as part of their revision of their MBSAPs and implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, they include actions that update their KBA networks by identifying KBAs and also monitoring those KBAs, and then using those KBAs to guide 30 by 30, guide identification of OECMs, and also guide spatial planning. And then using the KBAs once they're identified and integrating them into national policy and legislation. Next slide, please. So the key messages I'd like to leave you with is that if we're going to halt extinctions, we have to be making sure that we put 30 by 30 OECMs and this spatial plan into areas that are going to have a significant impact on species and significant populations of those species. KBAs provide our best global data set for that. The data is free to any government who wants to use it. And KBA identification should be a key activity of projects supporting Target 1 and Target 3 in the Global Biodiversity Framework. So just a call on all countries that haven't updated their KBA network to do so by 2030. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for that presentation. If you do have any questions for Andrew, please drop them in the chat. Actually, we're going to innovate a little bit. We're going to drop a document with the room for you to ask questions, because we're over 120 participants, and I'm assuming that not all of the questions will be addressed during the webinar, and we want to make sure that your question is saved somewhere. So Lexi, I'm going to ask you to drop the link in the chat, and then you can use one of the lines to ask your questions. And if we don't answer during the session, then we'll make sure we liaise with the participant and the speaker, and then we'll send you back the questions. Considering the time, actually, I'm going to ask if we can move forward to the next presentation. That is an illustration from Mozambique, from our colleague at WCS. So Martina, let's stop sharing the screen, because I think our colleague will share their screen. Hildo Matimele, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, so I will take you guys after this presentation from Andre to just give you an example from Mozambique. So this is basically to share two parts. The first part is to show you how we went through the process of identifying key biodiversity areas in Mozambique. Then the final section is to give you some insights in terms of how are we using these KBAs in Mozambique. So one of the main components of the process of identifying KBAs is to establish a national coordination group. This is a group of people or institutions that will oversee the whole work related to KBAs, will facilitate, will help to build consensus among stakeholders. So it's a really, really key component, and it's the first one. So this may sound like just one meeting will be enough, but probably not, as we will see here. So First, we had a team of people managing the project that aimed to identify KBAs, and this team was within WCS in Mozambique. And then this team was working closely with the government through the National Directorate for Environment. This has changed now with the current government, so it's called National Directorate for Environment and Climate Change, but they still with the same role and added a little bit more. So then with this directorate, we discussed which institution should be brought to be part of the NCG. And then because there are also existing groups that contribute for biodiversity-related matters, we wanted to ensure that we are not setting a completely new thing, but we leverage with existing groups. And for example, the Biodiversity Working Group, and also make sure that for our contest in Mozambique, the NCG would also oversee work related to release of species and ecosystems. So it's flexible. You can have a KBA and NCG in your country that is only overseeing KBAs, but for the context of Mozambique, we thought it would make more sense to add together. And as I mentioned, a number of meetings were held. So for us in Mozambique, we needed 4 meetings at least to be able to establish a national coordination group. These meetings entailed to discuss, explain what KBAs are, what will be the role of NCGs, and build consensus among different understandings about KBAs within the country. So only on 13 December 2019, that's when we were able to establish NCG, which involve all these institutions you see here, from publics to civil society and NGOs. So everyone is part of these NCGs, and these are the institutions or organizations that can contribute towards biodiversity and environmental related matters. As part of this process, it was also important to establish a group of people that would make sure that we have the data in the right format and in place so that we can apply the criteria. And in some instances, it will be necessary it was for Mozambique necessary to establish memorandum of understandings or collaboration agreement with experts to be able to share or to use the data that they had. And those working groups for all those taxonomy groups that they showed. So we had regular meetings where we would discuss the progress in terms of data preparation, but also because red listing of species is a key component of this process, we would also have those regular meetings to check information on conservation status for those species. Then we worked on establishing a list of species that show the potential to trigger KBA status. So this is going through a long list and see what species fall under threatened categories. And during his presentation, he showed that criterion A is about threatened biodiversity, being threatened species one of that component. So you go through that, and then you find out all species that fall under threatened categories, but you also have those that are range restricted or are only known from one location. So you build the list of those species, and those they stand the potential to trigger KBAs. Then you go through the process of data mobilization for those potential trigger species, okay, and also engaging with experts. And the person that was assigned to work for each taxonomy group will be the leading data mobilization process and meeting with experts to discuss whether the information that was being mobilized was accurate and what was missing and filling the gaps. And this information was mostly on about population size, which you can find it from the red list of species, and also looking at the global level information because it's a global assessment. You apply global criteria. Then it's important to have a better understanding of the criteria. So after mobilizing all the information, then we had a workshop to start understanding the criteria. How do we apply the criteria? So we had Andrew coming to Maputo to help us go through the process, and we had over 40 people attending that workshop. It was really to go to have first contact with the KBA criteria to be able to identify the KBAs. As I mentioned, red lists of species as well as of ecosystems is a key component to inform the KBA identification. So we also had training on how to apply the red list assessment criteria for species as well. And this was conducted by colleagues from Zambia in South Africa, Liz von Staden, who came also to dedicate 2 days of training, then hands-on red listing a number of species from amphibians, reptiles, as part of the training process. Then, having done this, is to apply those KBA criteria. So having applied KBA criteria, then you move on to delineated boundaries. So this is another key component, key stage of KBA identification. So you mobilize this data for the species you want to work with, then apply the criteria. After applying the criteria, you move on to delineate boundaries. So boundaries are delineated with in mind that it has to be a management unit. So this is what we did through workshops, bringing everyone in the room and discuss, checking existing boundaries of conservation areas, remove degraded areas, and so on, and achieve something that will be manageable. Okay. Then you need to engage with a wide range of stakeholders to discuss whether the boundaries make sense. For example, for KBAs that were identified under initial criteria, so you need to discuss. The white line there is showing what was important bird area, and the yellow line is showing what is the actual KBA. The map to the right was an assessment of vegetation. It's showing through the orange color that there has been vegetation throughout the time. So it made a lot more sense to reduce the boundaries to capture the species, reptile species and bird species you see to the right. So to do this, you need to engage with those who identified the important bird area initially. And that process was completed. Then you submit all that information to the National Coordination Group. The National Coordination Group will take that information to the KBA Secretariat, but first it goes to the regional KBA focal point. So it's a long process. This is a sort of summary of the whole process that you need to go through to identify the KBAs. It's important to engage with government, and this was one of the moments that we engaged, and this was the Minister of Environment who launching the KBAs in Mozambique so that it could have this buy-in throughout the country. 29 KBAs were identified, being 4 marine and others, the rest 108 species. They are available through SIPMOS, which I shared the link already. You can access and learn more about this. But the most important part that I would like to focus for the last 3 minutes of my presentation is how are we using these KBAs? So they are being integrated into a wide range of legal framework. For example, KBAs, they are part of the ministerial diploma, which talks about integrating KBAs as avoided areas for development. And also we have KBAs regarded as areas for bird protection and their habitat. So this is sort of the impact of having identified the KBAs. It's also informed the National Marine Spatial Planning, and through this process, we developed 3 different scenarios. One aiming to protect 7 to 8%, and the second aiming to protect 10 to 12%, and the other aiming to protect 30%. And all these scenarios have locked the KBAs in there. And then engaging with the government was happy to work towards the second scenario, 10 to 12% until 2030 for the marine contest. So this is the focus moving forward. And actually, the area to the north is a new area that was established recently. It's a new protected area that was established recently, and it includes one of the KBAs. And it's also part of the new forest law that all forests they should be regarded as important for conservation consideration. So this is just a snapshot of what we are doing in Mozambique, and also the KPAs are being integrated into this spatial plan for the mapping oil and gas. So the licensing takes into account whether any area is or not a KBA, and they use that information to inform decision making. So this is what I had to share with you. I hope you follow it clearly, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for condensing so much relevant information in a brief presentation. Really appreciate it. Again, all of the presentations will be shared after this webinar, and I just dropped again the link to our Q&A in the chat. If you do want to ask questions, you can write your question in that sheet directly. For the sake of time, and because I want to make sure that the next two presentations are also having sufficient time, and that if you have questions for them, we can take them later. Please, let's go to the next one. Again, I do not aim to censor any question. There is a link on the chat that you can click on and enter your question. These are technical presentations that require some time to fully understand, so we appreciate you bearing with us. Annie, I will turn over to you now from UNDP. So you can give us a presentation on integrated spatial planning on UN Biodiversity Lab when you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marion, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annie Vernig. I'm a strategic advisor on science and policy at UNDP, and I'm coming to you today from the west coast of the US, where it is just starting to get light. Next slide. So I just wanted to start out by framing my presentation within this broader question that we've heard about from all of our previous presenters. So I'll go quickly through this. Next slide. We've seen repeated by Jamal, Andrew, others, that spatial planning is essential to the GBF. Next slide. But also, more broadly, spatial planning can help us to identify efficient uses or efficient approaches for land use planning, not only to meet the targets of the GBF, but also to more broadly balance competing needs across economic development, climate change resilience, and nature conservation. This question becomes increasingly challenging as our human footprint on the planet increases, which is what you're seeing on this map on the slide, which shows the most recent Human Industrial Index. Next slide. But we also know that many challenges exist to effective spatial planning. I made this slide before today's session, but we saw a lot of these same points come up during the whiteboard, with a big emphasis on the need for data, GIS tools, training and capacity building, and also stakeholder engagement. Next slide. So just about 7 years ago, we created UN Biodiversity Lab as one part of a way to begin to address these barriers. For those of you who aren't familiar, UNBL is a free open source platform that provides policymakers with access to spatial data and analytic tools to support national action around nature, climate, and sustainable development. And over the last 2 years in particular, we've worked to update UNBL to better meet the needs of parties in your work around the GBF. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. So I'm just going to highlight a few of these features here. Users can now access over 1,000 different data layers on UNBL, including those referenced in the metadata of the GBF monitoring framework. You can create secure workspaces to add your national data. You can use our intuitive and easily customizable map viewer to create maps for planning and for reporting, display metrics and headline indicators, and request technical support. And then if you just click one more time on this slide, we're also, as of this webinar, excited to be able to offer spatial planning support to our users. Next slide. So today marks our pre-launch of our ELSA integrated spatial planning tool on UNBL, which is specifically designed to support parties in your work around the GBF. Next slide. This tool builds on our experience over the past 6 years working to support 13 different countries to use integrated spatial planning to create essential life support area maps that identify where action to protect, manage, and restore nature can best deliver across a suite of national priorities. And Marion's going to drop a few links that detail a little bit more about both the scientific methodology and the stakeholder engagement processes behind this work. Next slide. So what is the ELSA tool on UN Biodiversity Lab, and why is it relevant for parties to the CBD? This tool enables you to create a priority action map specifically for your country to show where nature-based actions to protect nature, restore nature, manage nature, and green urban areas can support the achievement of GBF targets 1 through 12. Next slide. So how does this tool work, and how can you use it as part of a spatial planning process in your country? Next slide. So we heard a little bit about this from both Jamal and Andrew, but it's important to go beyond target 1 when we're looking at spatial planning. Well, target 1 is the one that directly identifies a need for spatial planning. Many of the other targets are equally dependent on effectively including biodiversity in spatial planning. So if we look at target 2, for instance, on this slide, I know the text is a little bit small, but with those red highlights, you can see the reference for the need to enhance ecosystem functions and services, as well as to ensure the importance of maintenance of ecological integrity and landscape connectivity. To do this well, we first need to map these features and then bring those maps into a spatial planning process. Next slide. So this need for spatial planning goes beyond the GBF's targets that focus on biodiversity and ecosystems to also those that consider broader benefits we receive from nature. So here you're seeing targets 10 through 12, which reference natural resource industries, various forms of ecosystem services, and the health and well-being benefits that humans receive from urban green space. Again, all of these different values can and should be spatially mapped, and this information integrated into a spatial planning framework capable of considering these values alongside those that map biodiversity. Next slide. So we worked from these central elements of the GBF targets to design a customized spatial planning analysis specifically for the GBF. We use the GBF monitoring framework as a starting point to identify input data, building on the significant scientific effort that was conducted to identify the highest quality and most up-to-date indicator datasets. We also worked with an expert advisory committee of scientists and national experts implementing the CBD to identify gaps for spatial planning and to identify datasets to fill these gaps. So the result is a custom input data stack that you can see on this slide just for target 1. And then next slide. Here you can see this for targets 1 through 12. So I know that there's a lot here, but basically I just want to emphasize that on the left, you're seeing all of the spatial GBF targets, and on the right, all of the input data. So in total, we've brought together 30 different data layers to provide a way to map GBF targets 1 through 12. And if you click just one more time, as Andrew showed us, KBAs is a really important layer when we're thinking about this type of spatial planning for biodiversity, and it is a key input layer as part of this analysis. Next slide. So we brought together all of this data within a spatial planning framework and created a specialized tool on UNBL, which is now available to all users within our UN spaces. Next slide. So how can you specifically use this tool? Next slide. So you can use the ELSA tool for your country in 3 easy steps. So first, you set budgets or area-based targets for nature-based actions based on your national biodiversity targets. Next slide. Second, you weight this input data based on your national priorities. Next slide. And third, run an optimization to create a map for your country that shows where protection, restoration, management, and urban greening can best support the delivery of GBF targets 1 through 12 at the national level. Next slide. So with my last minute or so, I'm just going to highlight a little bit more support that's available to you from the UNBL team. Next slide. So first, our Tier 1 offering is fully free. This is the ELSA tool that I've just introduced. I'm not going to wait for this whole GIF to go through, but you can see this in my slides. It takes you through the full process that I just described of reviewing input data, setting parameters, and creating a spatial priority map. Next slide. Our Tier 2 offering focuses on further customization and technical support. So here we're able to offer at cost facilitated stakeholder engagement, integration of national data, as well as the production of customized technical reports and policy briefs to support national validation and uptake. Next slide. And then our Tier 3 offering is a much more in-depth engagement to co-create a spatial planning analysis, derivative maps that can support on-the-ground action, and extensive capacity building at the national level. Next slide. So we'd love to invite all of you to be a part of the growing number of institutions and countries that we're working with around the ELSA tool. On this slide, you can see our pilot countries who are using the ELSA tool to support MBSAP development and implementation. Next slide. And on this slide, our broader community of partners, donors, and governments who've engaged with UNBL and ELSA over the past 7 years. Next slide. So finally, just a few ways to engage with us. First, we'd love to invite all of you to join us at Substa for our official launch of the tool. It's on Wednesday, October 22nd. Please mark your calendars. We're co-launching this with 5 different governments, including Zambia, who you'll hear from up next. And then you can also request an ELSA tool for your country, explore further support, and access our guidance materials at the links on this slide. So with that, I will say thank you and turn it back to Marion.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you for this super interesting tool and methodology. Congratulations on the soft launch today. Really looking forward to the side event at Substa for those of us who will be able to attend. Again, if you do have questions for Annie, there is a document. Alexi, I'm going to ask you to re-drop it again in the chat. I want to make sure that colleagues have access to it. Do not be shy. Ask questions on a written format. We'll respond to them. I want to make sure that the last 10 minutes are sufficient for our colleague from Senbi, who will show and display and explain how ELSA was used actually in South Africa and the results from there. So Tsamelo, if you are with us, I see you have opened your microphone. Over to you.
Thanks, Marion, and thanks, Anne. I think you have set the scene perfectly. And Jumbo colleagues. And I'm just going to set up the scene. I'm not going to go into details about it. I'm just going to go broadly on how we have taken some of the products from ELSA and apply it in the country. And many people, when you're looking at the title, you might find why is not ELSA, but it's ELSA. Actually, in South Africa, we have actually extended because of we need to take action, especially looking at nature-based action. That is why we identified and extended the, the title to essential life support action areas. That's why you find in South Africa, it might be different to the rest of the country. Next slide. To take you to set up the scene, I like to take you through these scenarios where if you, most of the member countries or the countries and the member states, if you have limited resources, how and where will you, if you are required to protect, restore, and rehabilitate, as an example, 100 hectares of this area, the question that might be posed is, how are you going to, identify and prioritize the landscape where nature-based actions are required, as well as what are the tools and guidelines that are available to enable, strategic, integrated, and systematic approach. And as an example, I gave those three scenarios. Are you going to choose one, A, B, or C? This is to set up the scene. When I'm going through the presentation, think about this scene, this scenario that I've just posted. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, thank you. For today's presentation, I'm just going to take you through why we undertook this project, how we undertook it, what were the results, and how did we apply the results that we received, or the outputs of the project. Next slide. Just as a background, I just want to take you through, what are the opportunities and challenges that are facing the country, South Africa. Many people know South Africa, it's one of, we have high biodiversity richness and wealth in the country, looking at endemism, looking at biodiversity across all the different realms, terrestrial, marine, as well as freshwater. This is also that example that I gave on that map that shows all suite of important biodiversity in the country, which is mapped across all the realms. And with that being said, even though we have this, beautiful wealth of biodiversity, these ecosystems that are the foundation of this, they are under threat. And through the assessment that we conduct in the country on a 5-year basis, it indicated that some of these ecosystems looking at are under threat, and others are even not well protected. As an example, from the National Biodiversity Assessment, which was conducted in 2018, and then now we are in the final process of publishing the latest one in 2025. It shows that some of the ecosystem, your likes of your rivers and wetlands, are actually threatened. And this actually gives us that even though we have this wealth of biodiversity or wealth of nature, these are actually threatened. Next slide. And what are those? Just to give you an example of some of the threats to this biodiversity, looking at what we call land management, poor land management, your invasive, what we call invasive alien species, your land degradation, climate change, your mining activities, as well as what you call it, pollution. This is kind of the example of other threats that actually pose the activities that pose threats to biodiversity. Next slide. And then these threats, if we bring them home or closer to them, they have socio-economic and environmental impact. This is just to give you some of those examples that these threats pose when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the social, as well as the environment. And then when you're looking at some of the pictures, they show some of those activities that happened recently in the country, your dam siltation, some of the flooding that happens in recent, the droughts, the wildfire which happened in Table Mountain caused by the alien invasive, the floods that happened in KZN which damaged a lot of infrastructure. And these, if you not consider it, they actually pose so much threat. Next slide. And then why is this, significant? Why am I telling you this? Next slide. We understand, and through various literature and analysis that have been undertaken, that ecosystems provide valuable systems or provide services, valuable services across, across the space. And these, the services that are being provided by the ecosystem, the recent study which was done by TEPI, it has estimated that this ecosystem, from cultural, professional, supporting, and regulation, they provide close to 300 billion per annum, if you actually can quantify them. And then this actually shows that why it's important to actually properly prioritize or spatially prioritize the areas. Next slide. And how do we go about it? Where do you need the action need to be taken? And where, as well as how? The next slide. And just to bring you into the space, South Africa has a long history when it comes to spatial assessment as well as spatial prioritization. When you're looking at the likes of your national biodiversity assessment stemming from 2004 till to the current, which identify and highlight what are the key threats as well as how those ecosystems are protected, as well as what we have done. We have actually in the country tried to map out which areas in the country are important, for biodiversity, but also even for protected area expansion. And this work has been embedded and entrenched into some of the local, some of the local policies and legislation. Next slide. And then we said, okay, how do we take out the information, this whole suite of information that we have championed throughout the years, or we have actually crafted all throughout the years, taking it globally, sharing it with the global atmosphere. That's when the project ELSA came into space. I'm not gonna give you the definition, but what I'd like you to take from the definition, which is kind of the key central to today's topic, it's integrated spatial planning approach that maps out when nature-based action is required. I think for me, that is actually what is it is critical. As an example, why is this actually important? It's to mobilize, some of the resources as well as to implement some of the policies in the country. This process and then the work actually assist us to guide, the national level planning, such as the protected area expansion, identifying, the future economic nodes in the country, but also to mobilize the resources. Next slide. And these were some of the policy commitments that were undertaken or identified when the process was being, the project was being undertaken. And these were the country looked at the 10 policy, looking at water, biodiversity, land degradation, climate change, a whole campus of suite information, and use various biodiversity information, spatial information to come up with that. Next slide. And I acknowledge that my time might be running. And this just to show you how the information was translated from the policy that we have identified through to the features that were used to address those policy commitment. Next slide. And then what was the outcome for this? Next. And then this is the one of the outcome of the process that was undertaken, the ELSA, which has identified 5 priorities in the country where you're looking at where action is required, looking at protection, where you need to avoid loss, reduce, urban adaptation, and restore. And this is actually the map that shows where those actions have been identified in the country. And this has taken a whole suite of information to produce this the static map that you see here. Next slide. And then for my final slide closing is that, next slide, bringing that scenario that I have shared with you, that how do you gonna identify this, and then what spatial tools can be used. Next slide. And this is my final slide, is that how can the ELSA be used? Looking at this, I've just grouped them just to make an example. First and foremost, looking at spatial prioritization and planning, project screening and development, reporting mechanism and resource mobilization. And these are the examples that shows how in the country we have used the ELSA product when it comes to the spatial prioritization. That's been used for protected area expansion, the C+, as well as when you're looking at the GBF, targets, the target 2, target 3, as well as when looking at target 1. And there's been other whole suite of projects that have used the ELSA products to integrate it into their products. And that shows how we have taken that final product and tried to use it in various programs, planning, resource mobilization, as well as the screening. And this is just a glimpse of what we have done in the country. And my last slide is just to indicate that, to highlight and emphasize that my final advice that F, it's not ours, it's the treasure we hold for the interest for the future generation. In that, I would like to thank you, and apologies, I had to rush it just due to respect time. Thank you, Marian. It's over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks really to the countries presenting today. It's really a wealth of knowledge and experience from the countries is really fascinating, and thank you for taking the time for putting those slides together. Again, even if Tammy had to rush a little bit to make sure that we were on time, those presentations are available for you to look after this webinar, and then you have actually on your screen right now the contact detail of each of the presenters if you have questions on their presentation or any idea for further collaboration. I know we are at time, and I know most of you are going to have to disconnect. If there is a possibility for our speaker to stay online just 5 minutes and see if there is any pressing question that absolutely have to be addressed now, then I will open the floor to our colleague. I dropped several times during the webinar a link to a Google document where you can enter your questions if you want them to be answered. So far, I do not see any question, but please reach out if you have questions. Just opening the floor very briefly for our colleagues and participants. We did not mean to not engage with you, but these are technical, very technical content and required some time to present. We can continue engaging with you maybe on the peer-to-peer in the coming weeks if there is interest, and for sure in person at CEPSTA. Is there any question or any pressing issue that you would like to have an answer from any of our speakers before I close this webinar? I am looking at the chat and I do not see any question right now. So I will take this as the presentation having been extremely clear, but I am sure they will bring more questions to you. So please do use the Google Sheets to ask anything that you need to ask, or please feel free to reach out to our panelists directly. With this, I think I will close the webinar then in order to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you everyone for giving some of your time, the presenters, of course, but as well as the participant, so that there can be an exchange of knowledge here. Many thanks to our interpreters also to ensure interpretation across languages and making sure everyone can participate. We hope that today gave you some perspective on the tools available, why they're here, why spatial planning is important, and some example of how the countries are using them right now. We hope that this is the continuation of a dialogue between experts and governments and stakeholders that wish to integrate spatial planning in their NBSAP and national report. Please find us at CEPSTA if you come in person, and if not, reach out to us. My last request is for you to take 2 minutes when you close this webinar to answer a little survey to get an idea of the satisfaction of this meeting and what is needed next. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your engagement, for your presentation, and I look forward to the next time to connect with you. Have a great day, great rest of your day, good night, depending on where you are, and take care. Thank you.